Hi. In this talk, I'd like us to examine the context that we live in today, a context that has been shaped by the technology that we are immersed in, and a context that we haven't really taken time out to examine in our usual day-to-day life. I think best-selling author Thomas Friedman captures it best with the titles of his two books. His first best-selling book was called The World is Flat, A Brief History of the 21st Century. And there he talks about how our world is increasingly interconnected. In his follow-up book, a book that he has given the intriguing title, Thank You for Being Late, his main thesis is that the world is not only flat, but it is also fast. And we see this as evident in many of the new things that have emerged in our midst that were not expected or even imagined just a few years ago. A great example of this would be Wikipedia. Wikipedia is probably the largest and most updated encyclopedia in the world, but there's not a single volume that's been printed out. Who would have thought? Another example of this would be Uber. Uber is probably the largest taxi company in the world, but they don't possess a single vehicle. Another example, we have Airbnb. Airbnb is arguably the largest global hotel chain, but they don't own a single piece of real estate. How fast the world has changed, and it has changed beyond our expectation and beyond our imagination. Let's take a step back and just think about what's going on as we are gathered here virtually, thinking about our context. Every single minute, every single day, there are billions of Facebook likes. Every single minute, every single day, there are 350,000 tweets. And every single minute, every single day, 400 hours of new video are being uploaded on YouTube. A Pew survey in 2016 found that almost half of Americans, 46%, admit that they can't live without their smartphones. Another survey just a year before that found that young adults spend 1/3 of their waking hours on their phone. Imagine that, an average of 5 hours a day, 85 separate times, no more than 30 seconds each time. I found the figures rather incredible, so what I did was I monitored my own use of the phone, and guess what it found? It found an average of 6 hours a day. Of course, no guilt, no judgment, because a lot of times I use my phone also for work, aside from essential communication. But it just goes to show us that technology is really very much embedded in our lives. As a result, we live in an increasingly connected world, and more people are leading increasingly virtual lives. Now let's talk about virtual reality. If an increasing number of people are leading virtual lives, what do we mean by virtual? Usually we mean that virtual is not really real. It's almost real. It's second-class reality. So let's ask this question: how real is virtual reality? Is it really less real than face-to-face reality? Well, the best way to answer this question is to ask ourselves, what are our criteria for determining whether something is real or not? In general, there are 3 criteria that we can use. The first is, can it be measured? Now, today, nobody really agrees with this as a criterion for reality because this is too positivist. I think many of us will agree that many things that cannot be measured are actually real. But that's good for a discussion in the future, I think. But most of us will agree that as long as something can be observed or experienced, then it must be real. Now, this would be called the perceptual criterion for reality. And if we use this criterion, we would say that certainly virtual reality can be observed, virtual reality can be experienced, very much so. So for this reason, we have to say that it is real. But the perceptual criterion for reality is not the only criterion. There is a superior criterion for reality. So that even if something cannot be observed or experienced, as long as it can have effects, then it is considered to be real. Now, this superior criterion for reality is called the causal criterion for reality. And if we use this criterion, certainly we have to conclude that virtual reality is real, because virtual reality has effects. Can you guess what's going on here? This image is similar to the previous one, where the girl has just received a hate text. Cyberbullying is an example of how virtual reality can affect lives and damage lives, unfortunately. This teenager posted a note saying she cried every night, lost all her friends and respect. She has been a victim of cyberbullying. Virtual reality is real. Last summer, I read an interesting book by John Ronson called So You've Been Publicly Shamed. The title is very revealing. We don't need to try too hard to guess what it is all about. No? In this book, Ronson, a journalist, chronicles the effect of public shaming in people's lives. And in particular, he talks about a bad joke on Twitter that went wrong and went viral. He recounts a story of a PR consultant who takes a flight to South Africa for work, but right before boarding her plane, she tweets a joke to her 20 or so followers, all of them close friends, and her tweet said, "Going to Africa, hope I don't catch AIDS, LOL." Okay, it sounds like a racist joke, but it's also a joke shared among friends, no matter how inappropriate. But what happened was, after she boarded her plane, as she was on air on the way to South Africa, Twitter exploded. Apparently, one of her followers retweeted her joke, and a columnist who had thousands of followers retweeted it with a comment, "Racist, no good." It seemed that everyone in the Twitter universe joined the bandwagon in bashing this lady. Many called for her to be fired, and others, as they often do when it's a woman who's being bashed, actually called for her to be raped. Now, the PR firm that she was working for obviously saw what was going on and decided to terminate her right there on Twitter. To top it all, before she landed, someone tweeted what I would do to see her face as she gets out of the gate and she finds out that she's just been fired. And true enough, what happened? Somebody took a picture of her as she was checking her phone as she stepped out of the plane. Very cruel, very mean. But this public shaming phenomenon is quite widespread, and as chronicled in the book of Ronson, has lasting effects. This lady was telling him that after she got fired and she tried to look for a job, she could not find any job for years on end. And the reason is that any potential employer, after interviewing her, all they had to do was Google her and this whole thing would come out. The internet is quite unforgiving. It keeps a virtually permanent record of things we've posted or things that people have posted about us. And what's more, this tendency sometimes results in a digital double life, a digital schizophrenia or split personality. Sometimes the meekest person in the room turns out to be a Mr. Hyde. If you take the time to check out his online post, you would be surprised because there's a completely different persona online. So it seems that social media produces this tendency to engage in shaming and bashing because of the illusion that you're anonymous when you're on social media. Of course, we know better than that, no? We are never actually anonymous on the internet. No? But because of this illusion, we get the feeling that we're not accountable, and so we feel that we have the license to be vicious, that we have the license to give vent to any desire and unleash any hatred. A study has shown that the emotions that are most easily spreadable on social media are anger and sadness. Now, the frightening thing about this public shaming phenomenon on social media is that it is not performed by professional trolls. According to Ronson, it's the ordinary folks like you and me who jump into the bandwagon and bash like there's no tomorrow. That's the more frightening thing. If we reflect on our context, if we take the time to examine how our lives are affected by social media and technology, We could say, I will argue, that there are 5 endangered species in the digital age. And the first of these is values. In 2016, McCann updated their global survey about the youth called The Truth About Youth. And the survey involved 33,000 respondents, one-third of them between the ages of 16 to 30. As you can see, it was a truly global study covering countries like the US, the UK, India, Brazil, as well as China, Japan, Hong Kong, and the Philippines. The study yielded many interesting findings that disclose to us some of the effects of social media technology. Here's an example of a question that they asked. Have you ever posted a negative comment about someone you know? And globally, you can see that 12% of the respondents said they have done that. And if we look at this chart, we'll see that as expected, more young people tend to post a negative comment. No? So about 1/4 of those who are 16 to 20 years old have posted a negative comment about someone they know. That figure goes down slightly if you're 21 to 34 years old to less than 1/5. If you're 35 to 50, about 10% have posted a negative comment about someone they know, and that number goes down. What's interesting here is even those who are above 70, there are at least 2% who have posted a negative comment about someone they know. So it's not even really an age thing. If we go to Asia Pacific, where we are located, the number goes up slightly from 12% globally to 16% in the region. And we see the same trend as far as age is concerned. A small consolation here is that those who are 70 years old and older have not posted a negative comment about someone they know, at least if they're in Asia Pacific. What about the Philippines? If 12% is the global figure and 16% is the figure for Asia Pacific, as we can see here, the Philippines is 22%. Here are a couple more interesting findings from the McCann study about the youth. This question was asked, how many have received a nude photo or a sext? A sext, of course, is a sex text message. A, more than half. B, between 26% to 50%. C, 21% to 25%. D, 16% to 20%. Or E, less than 1/5 or 20%. What's your guess? As it turns out, the answer is C, because the figure globally is 25%. Now in Asia Pacific, that figure is lower, it's 15%, but it's interesting to look at the other countries. In Japan, it's 4%, in China, it's 12%, in the Philippines, it's 17%, and in India, it's 23%. Here's another question. How many have looked at porn on a mobile device? A, more than half. B, 25% to 50%. C, 21 to 25%. D, 16 to 20%. E, 10 to 15%. The global figure is 1/3, 29%. What about the Philippines? It's 42%. So the first endangered species would be values. All we need to do is call to mind the popular TV shows, and especially the so-called reality TV shows, and try to think about their hidden messages. One common message is to win at all costs. Never mind the rules of the game. Forget about morality. As long as you win, then that's okay. According to Alan Greenspan, commenting on human greed, never in history have there been so many ways to cut corners. This is confirmed by the disturbing findings of the Good Work Project found in the book of the same title, Good Work, with the subtitle When Excellence and Ethics Meet. In the book, Howard Gardner and his colleagues conclude that for young people, the end simply justifies the means. Do whatever it takes to be successful now. Be ethical? Well, maybe later. The problem with postponing being ethical, of course, is that usually it comes too late or it never comes at all. Also, we have TV shows and apps where love is almost compared to shopping, where the hidden message is You can try it on as much as you want before deciding and maybe committing. Here's an interesting book by sociologist Christian Smith from the University of Notre Dame. The book is called Lost in Transition. The subtitle is The Dark Side of Emerging Adulthood. What he has done is that he has conducted in-depth interviews with over 200 young people, 18 to 23 years old from across America, and the topic was their moral lives. They were asked questions about right and wrong, moral dilemmas, and the meaning of life. The findings are interesting and intriguing. Here's one example. For most of the respondents, rape and murder are considered clearly wrong. But when it comes to drunken driving, cheating in a test, or cheating on a partner, this is a common response. I don't really deal with right and wrong that often. It's personal, they add. It's up to me. Respondent X, for example, has this to say, I guess what makes something right is how I feel about it. But different people feel different ways. So I couldn't speak on behalf of anyone else as to what's right and wrong. What I'll consider right or wrong, what I will eventually decide to do, depends on whatever makes me happy or how I feel. So there's a tendency to rely on one's own emotion and preferences, which may result in disobeying authority. And according to Alan Wolf, Americans believe each person should develop his or her own morality and not judge others. This is really emotivism, when it seems impossible to secure moral agreement in our culture because all judgments are based on how we feel at the moment. It's one thing to be respectful of other people's views and to be open to them. It's another thing to say that everyone is equally correct. It's completely up to the individual. The former would be pluralism, a good thing, and the latter would be relativism, a dangerous thing. So the first endangered species in the digital age would be values, morality. Of course, we are not saying here that every single user of social media or every single person who is exposed to social media technology has no values or is immoral. What we're saying here is that if we're not careful and we're not discerning in our use of social media, in the way we expose ourselves to social media, what will happen is that pluralism can lapse into relativism, morality might become too private, so we end up deciding that we can be the arbiter of our own morality regardless of their effects on other people or on ourselves. So the social media culture tend to breed three mindsets, and they are moral individualism, where morality is considered personal and private. Secondly, it's emotivism, where one is free to choose whatever feels good at the moment. And third, it's relativism, that everyone is equally correct. Now, the problem with these three mindsets is that they do endanger values and morality. So, the first endangered species in the digital age is values.